Democrats are hoping to pass the bill before the Senate leaves for its scheduled August recess at the end of this week. All right, joining me right now to talk further, Christopher Regan. He is the former vice chair of the West Virginia Democratic Party and someone who knows Senator Joe Manchin pretty well from when Manchin served as the state's governor. Christopher, we talked to you a lot of times about, Manchin's style. So we thought of, who's better than you to talk about, is this typical Manchin on display here. So glad you could be with us. So the senator shocked a lot of people in Washington when, he seemingly out of the blue agreed on this bill. But now we know he and, Schumer have been working on this quietly. Did this surprise you, or is this his style?
Well, my heart especially goes out to the Republicans who were surprised by something Joe Manchin did that seemed like a reversal, because the Democrats have been facing quite a bit of that, and now they seem to have gotten a taste of what it's really like. But no, I think this is very consistent with what Joe Manchin is like, and what we talked about, I think it must be 6-7 months ago now.
Yeah.
That there always had to be a deal. There had to be a deal for a couple of reasons. One is that something has to pass for Joe to get what he wants. Nothing, his parts of the bill can't be in there if there is no bill, but also because he likes to deliver a big compromise to his voters. That's something that he's pegged his reputation on for years now. And his tour of the morning shows today really showed that, where he says, oh, there's things in here for Republicans, there's things in here for Democrats. Everybody should love this deal.
So you say this, this is consistent with his reputation, meaning seemingly he is going it alone. He seems like he's working on his own kind of plan. It may be inconsistent with the party's plan, but then come to find out he is collaborative. He is willing to make compromise. And that is on display right now, you see?
Well, he didn't make as many compromises, certainly, as I was hoping for. Things like the child tax credit and dental coverage becoming part of Medicare. Those are things that are just desperately needed, and particularly in West Virginia. And he did not allow those to be a part of the bill, which is disappointing. And when he says in the audio that you showed, when he says inflammatory, what he means is inflationary. And he just continues to insist that those things are inflationary. But there are huge Democratic priorities in the bill, negotiating prescription drug prices in Medicare, the Green Bank, all of the climate spending, and some corporate minimum tax that I think people had written off, that they were never going to get. But the right people spoke to him. I know he heard from Larry Summers, whom he respects, and he heard from Bill Gates, whom he respects. And a lot of people came to him, which he likes people to come to him, and said, we need to get something done. We need to get something done here before the midterms. And lo and behold, he delivers that deal that also captures things for him on the back end for fossil fuel companies, like expanded permitting and drilling and things that he wanted to have happen.
So earlier this month, when Manchin said he unequivocally would not support the climate or tax provisions of the Democratic economic package, you believe largely because he did have these conversations with Larry Summers and the like that you just mentioned, and that is what explains the turnaround on his thinking now?
Well, certainly there was. I've never wavered that there was always going to be a deal. There had to be some deal eventually. But what brought it up, I think, a month into this time, was those conversations. I think Jeff Stein in the Washington Post reported on it in great detail. All the people who appealed to him, and those appeals, I think, moved up his timetable. But there was never not going to be a bill. There just, with Joe Manchin, there has to be a bill for him to sell at the end of the rainbow.
So as you know, the Democrats need 50 votes to pass this bill, and it's still unclear if Arizona Democratic Senator Kyrsten Sinema is on board. But Manchin says he is hopeful that she will support it once she reads it. Take a listen to his remarks.
First of all, Senator Sinema is my dear friend. I agree with her 100%. We're not going to raise taxes, and we don't. And on that, I think that basically when she looks at the bill and sees the whole spectrum of what we're doing and all of the energy we're bringing and all the reduction of prices and fighting inflation by bringing prices down, by having more energy, hopefully she will be positive about it. But, she'll make her decision, and I respect that.
All right, he prefaced it by saying, she is a good friend, but do you believe that he will, be a part of any kind of arm twisting? Will he be part of that campaign to kind of get her on board, convince her that convince her of what he was convinced of as to why he's now supporting it?
Oh, I think he will try. He will try very hard. I mean, I spent a lot of time around West Virginia politics and Joe Manchin. I don't know Kristen Sinema. However, I mean, Schumer and Manchin both would be in the position of being humiliated if they don't have a good idea of where Kristen Sinema is at on what they've agreed to and announced to the world and paraded before us for the last several days. I mean, they could not have been so foolish as to just simply surprise her with it and hope, they'll talk her into it later. They must know where she is on most of it. And in particular, she has in the past, I do know, been very supportive of the climate provisions. So to lose all that over the corporate minimum tax, I mean, almost nothing is more popular than corporations should pay a minimum tax instead of no tax. When we read these stories that, Amazon or some company like that made billions and paid no tax, I mean, it just outrages every American. So who is going to hitch their wagon to, no, I would really like for them to continue to pay zero.
All right, Christopher Regan, always good to see you. Thanks so much.
Thank you very much for having me. I love being here.
Oh, we love having you. Thanks.